In the heart of Belir, Ohio, the sun was setting on an ordinary spring day, May 7, 2017. The streets were quiet, the kind of silence that whispers secrets to those who listen closely. But behind this facade of normalcy, something darker was lurking, something so malevolent it would soon shatter the lives of those caught in its shadow. The Kenny family, David, his wife Sherry, and their young daughter, were on a routine visit, a simple task in their minds, to return a weed trimmer to their friend, Brad McGary. Arriving at Brad's quaint home, the world seemed to hold its breath. The front door offered no greeting, no sign of life, just an eerie stillness that clung to the air like a fog. David, with his wife and child beside him, felt a chill that wasn't from the evening breeze. Something was amiss. No one answered their knocks, and the house, usually warm with laughter and light, now stood mute and unwelcoming. A decision was made to check around the back, where the service door stood slightly ajar, an invitation to the unknown. Stepping inside, they were met with chaos. The house was in disarray, signs of a struggle or a hurried departure scattered across the rooms. Sherry called out for Brad, her voice echoing through the emptiness, only to be met with silence. A silence that spoke volumes. David, driven by a mix of concern and dread, led his family towards the basement. Each step down was a descent into uncertainty. What they found there would not only change the course of their lives but also unveil a narrative of betrayal, desire, and murder that would grip the town of Belir in a tale too horrific to fathom. There, in the dim light of the basement, lay Brad McGary, his life extinguished, his body a testament to violence. The discovery was like a stone thrown into still water, the ripples of which would touch every corner of their world, revealing layers of secrets, lies, and a love that turned deadly. This is not just a story of a murder, but a deep exploration into the human heart, where affection can morph into obsession, and friendship can cloak the darkest of intentions. Welcome to Deception and Desire, when best friends become lovers and killers, where every step forward uncovers another layer of this chilling narrative. David Kenny, at the age of 30, had carved out a life that looked, from the outside, like the epitome of stability. He was married to Sherry, a woman he had met at his 21st birthday celebration, where their connection was immediate and undeniable. David, driven by a deep sense of responsibility, had taken on the role of stepfather to Sherry's 3 children, embracing the challenges of a blended family with open arms. To provide for this expanding family, he enrolled in a coal miner training program, choosing a path fraught with danger but promising enough income to support his new life. His days were spent underground, in the dark heart of the earth, while his nights were filled with the warmth of family love, or so it appeared. Sherry Kenny, on the other hand, had been navigating life as a single mother before David swept into her world. Her life had been one of struggle and resilience, raising her children with determination but also with the longing for a partner to share the load. When she met David, it was with a mix of hope and caution, but the young man's sincerity and commitment quickly won her over. They married young, forging a bond that was supposed to be unbreakable, built on love, trust, and shared dreams for the future. Brad McGary was a man who wore his heart on his sleeve, openly gay in a town where such openness was not always welcomed. Born in the 1970s in Cambridge, Ohio, he grew up in an era where prejudice was a daily companion. Despite this, Brad lived his truth with a defiance that inspired those around him. Initially pursuing a career in hairstyling, a profession that seemed at odds with the conservative ethos of his surroundings, he faced the harshness of small-town judgment but never wavered from his identity. Life, however, had other plans for Brad. In a surprising turn, he transitioned from the creative world of hair salons to the grueling labor of coal mining. This was not just a career change but a testament to his resilience, proving to himself and others that he could adapt and thrive under any circumstance. It was in this new chapter that Brad met David, and their friendship blossomed. Brad became an integral part of the Kenny family, earning the affectionate title of Uncle Brad from David's children. His presence was a beacon of joy, his laughter echoing through their home on countless occasions, his love for David's kids as genuine as any blood relation. But beneath this surface of camaraderie and familial bonds, there lay secrets, ones that would eventually unravel everything. Brad's life, vibrant and bold, was not without its shadows, and his relationship with David was one that would prove to be both his lifeline and his undoing. Together, they shared not just the hardships of the mind but the hidden depths of human emotion, leading to a narrative where love, deception, and desire would intertwine in the most tragic of ways. The affair between David and Brad was not something that happened overnight. It was a slow burn, a clandestine dance under the cover of darkness, where stolen moments were cherished like precious gems. It began subtly, with glances that lingered a bit too long, touches that were a bit too tender, moments where the line between friendship and something more was quietly crossed. For David, it was an exploration of a part of himself he had never allowed to surface, a desire he had kept locked away beneath the facade of his heterosexual marriage. For Brad, it was a deepening of affection, a love he had always hoped would one day be reciprocated by David in the open light of day. They met in secrecy, often under the guise of work or errands, their liaisons hidden from the eyes of the small town of Belir. There was an intensity to their connection, fueled by the thrill of the forbidden, the danger of discovery adding both fear and excitement to their encounters. David, torn between his love for his family and this newfound passion, lived a double life, one as the committed husband and father, the other as Brad's secret lover. This dichotomy was his daily reality, a tightrope walk over a chasm of potential ruin. But as time went on, the initial thrill gave way to a more complex web of emotions. Brad, perhaps out of love or frustration, began to crave more than just these hidden moments. He wanted acknowledgement, commitment, a future where he wasn't just David's secret but his partner in life. He hinted at the possibility of coming out, of breaking free from the shadows they had cast around their relationship. However, for David, this was a line he couldn't cross. His life with Sherry and the children was his anchor, his public identity, and the thought of losing it all was paralyzing. This growing tension was like a pressure cooker, the heat of their desires and the weight of their secrets building to an inevitable explosion. Brad, feeling the strain of living a lie, might have threatened to reveal their affair, either in a moment of heated argument or as a desperate plea for David to choose him. This threat, whether real or perceived, would have sent David into a state of panic. The fear of his double life collapsing around him, the dread of facing Sherry's betrayal, the potential ostracization from his community, it all loomed large, casting a shadow over every decision he made. Their relationship, once a source of clandestine joy, had now become a ticking time bomb. Each meeting, each whispered promise, was now tainted with the potential for disaster. The secret was no longer just a matter of hidden love but had morphed into something heavier, more dangerous. It was the kind of secret that could end careers, fracture families, and, as the world would soon see, lead to acts of desperation. In this crucible of love, desire, and fear, the seeds were sown for tragedy. The question was not if the secret would come to light, but how, and at what cost. The affair between David and Brad, hidden from view but felt in every interaction, had set the stage for a drama where love could turn lethal, where the boundaries between desire and destruction blurred into oblivion. On that fateful day, May 7, 2017, Brad McGary left a family lunch gathering around mid-afternoon, a smile on his face as he mentioned to a cousin that he was expecting a visit at home. There was a lightness to his step, perhaps unaware of the storm brewing in his own home. He spoke briefly of meeting someone, his words laced with the excitement of a rendezvous, though he didn't reveal who. The cousin, sensing the joy in Brad's eyes, didn't press for details, attributing it to Brad's often colorful social life. Unbeknownst to anyone at the gathering, David Kenny had planned to visit Brad that very afternoon. Under the guise of mundane errands, he had arranged to be alone with Brad, a pattern they had perfected over months of secrecy. However, this visit would not follow the usual script of longing glances and whispered promises. When David arrived at Brad's house, the atmosphere was charged with a tension that had been building for weeks, if not months. Words were exchanged, perhaps a confrontation over their future, or maybe it was Brad's push for something more concrete from David. Whatever the catalyst, the conversation escalated into an altercation, the kind where emotions run so high they can lead to irreversible actions. In the chaos of that argument, in the basement of Brad's home, a decision was made in the heat of the moment, or perhaps it was premeditated, we may never know. But what is undeniable is what happened next. David, perhaps driven by fear, desperation, or a deadly cocktail of both, fired 2 shots. Both bullets found their mark in the back of Brad's head, a chilling testament to the finality of his decision. Brad, who had moments ago been full of life, now lay lifeless on the basement floor, his dreams and secrets seeping away with his blood. The scene that followed was one of deliberate deception. David, now faced with the reality of what he had done, began to stage the crime scene. He ransacked the house, his hands trembling as he pulled out drawers, scattered belongings, trying to craft a narrative of a robbery gone wrong. The kitchen was left in disarray, the living room in chaos, items of value left untouched to suggest the intruder was looking for something specific, perhaps even personal. The intention was clear: to mislead, to create a story where he was not the villain, but the victim of circumstance. He knew the police would look for signs of a struggle, for reasons behind such a violent end. So, he worked to erase any trace of the true nature of their meeting, to hide the affair that had now turned deadly. Money was strewn about, suggesting a thief in haste, but no valuables were taken. The house, once a sanctuary of shared secrets, now bore the scars of a staged burglary meant to divert suspicion. This act of staging was not just about covering his tracks, it was about rewriting history, about painting a picture where the truth of their relationship was buried under the guise of random violence. David left the house, his heart pounding, his mind racing with what he had done, what he had become in those moments of panic and rage. The crime was committed, the scene set, and now, all that remained was for the truth to unravel or for the deception to hold. But in true crime, secrets have a way of coming to light, and the shadows cast by this act of violence were about to be pierced by the harsh light of investigation. The initial response from law enforcement to the discovery of Brad McGary's body was one of shock and procedural urgency. When the police arrived, they found no weapon at the scene, which led to the immediate, albeit brief, consideration of suicide. The position of Brad's body, lying face down in a pool of blood with no gun in sight, suggested to some officers that he might have taken his own life. But this theory crumbled quickly when the forensic team turned the body over, revealing no weapon beneath him. The focus then shifted to gathering forensic evidence and piecing together the crime scene. The scene was peculiar, the house was in disarray, yet valuable items remained, which was inconsistent with a typical burglary. This led to the suspicion that the chaos was staged to mislead the investigation into thinking it was a robbery gone wrong. The breakthrough came with the analysis of key evidence: surveillance footage. A neighbor's security camera captured a car, identified as belonging to David Kenny, arriving at Brad's house shortly before the estimated time of the murder. This footage was crucial, as it placed David at the scene when he claimed to have only visited later with his family. Phone data. Upon investigating David's mobile device, which he had handed over under the pretense of needing photos for the crime scene analysis, investigators uncovered data that contradicted his timeline. His phone records confirmed his presence at Brad's house during the time of the murder, a detail he had not disclosed. Testimonies from Brad's cousin. A significant turning point in the investigation came when Brad's cousin revealed that Brad had left the family gathering to meet someone named DJ at his home. Under questioning, this cousin disclosed that DJ was David Kenny, unveiling the secret relationship. This testimony shattered David's facade of being merely a concerned friend who had stumbled upon the scene. As the investigation deepened, the police conducted interviews to broaden their suspect pool. They initially looked into Brad's recent ex, Scotty, known for his volatile relationship with Brad. However, this lead was quickly dismissed when it was discovered that Scotty had been in jail for 3 months, serving time for violating probation, making it impossible for him to have committed the crime. Although the possibility of him orchestrating the murder from behind bars was considered, this was quickly ruled out due to lack of evidence or motive beyond their past conflicts. With Scotty out of the equation, the weight of suspicion settled on David. His presence at the crime scene at the time of the murder, coupled with the revelation of his hidden relationship with Brad, made him the prime suspect. The narrative of a robbery was now seen as a cover-up, a desperate attempt by David to obscure the truth of a lover's quarrel turned deadly. The police revisited David for more intense questioning, armed with this new evidence. They confronted him with the surveillance footage, the phone data, and the cousin's testimony. David, under the pressure of this mounting evidence, began to falter. His stories changed, his alibis weakened, and his explanations grew more convoluted, painting him further into a corner from which there was no escape. The investigation had evolved from a scene of apparent suicide to a complex murder case, where layers of deceit were peeled back to reveal a story of hidden desires, betrayal, and a crime motivated by fear of exposure. The truth, it seemed, was not just about who killed Brad McGary but why, and the answers were pointing directly at David Kenny. The walls were closing in on David Kenny. Each new piece of evidence, each testimony, tightened the noose around his neck. Facing relentless questioning from detectives, David's narrative began to unravel. His initial story was one of innocence, claiming he had simply come to return a weed trimmer with his family when they stumbled upon Brad's body. But this tale didn't hold water under scrutiny. As the interrogation progressed, David started to weave multiple stories, each one more desperate than the last. At first, he claimed there was another man at Brad's house, an argument ensued, and this unknown person had shot Brad before threatening David into silence. But when pressed for details, his description of this supposed third party was vague, changing with each retelling. This inconsistency was a clear sign of fabrication, further eroding his credibility. With the detective's persistence, David's stories grew more convoluted, shifting from an innocent bystander to an accidental witness to a crime. He eventually admitted to being at Brad's house alone earlier that day but insisted that his visit was innocent, just a talk. However, the evidence was too damning to support such claims. Finally, cornered by the irrefutable proof of his presence at the crime scene, phone records, and the revelation of his secret identity as DJ, David confessed. But even in confession, he sought to mitigate his culpability. He claimed self-defense, painting a picture where Brad had brandished a gun, waving it menacingly, which led to a struggle where David managed to take the weapon and, in a moment of fear, discharged it. He spoke of shooting Brad once in the forehead during this supposed struggle, and a second time as Brad lay on the ground, still claiming it was an act of self-preservation. Yet, the physical evidence and forensic analysis told a different story. The autopsy revealed Brad was shot twice in the back of the head, an act impossible to square with David's self-defense narrative. The absence of the murder weapon, which David admitted to disposing of, further complicated his story, as no gun was ever recovered to corroborate his tale. The confrontation with Sherry was inevitable. Before David was taken into custody, the police allowed him a moment with his wife, a conversation they monitored closely. In this private moment, the facade of their marriage crumbled. David confessed not just to the murder but to the affair he had been hiding. He spoke of regret, of how he wished he could undo what had been done, but the words were hollow in the face of Sherry's shock and pain. Sherry, who had stood by David through years of marriage, was now confronted with the reality of his betrayal on such an unimaginable scale. She listened in stunned silence as he admitted to his hidden life with Brad, her world collapsing under the weight of these revelations. Her questions were sharp, her disbelief palpable, as she asked how he could have lived such a lie, how he could have killed his best friend, her children's beloved Uncle Brad. This confession to Sherry was not just an admission of guilt for the crime but an acknowledgement of the deep personal betrayal within their relationship. It was a moment where the truth was laid bare, not just for the legal implications but for the irrevocable damage it caused to their family. David was arrested on May 9, charged with first-degree murder. His multiple stories had failed to obscure the truth, instead, they had woven a tapestry of deceit that only made the reality of his actions more stark. The confession, while claiming self-defense, did nothing to alleviate the weight of the evidence pointing to premeditation and a cover-up. David's life, once seemingly on a stable path, had taken a turn into a nightmare from which there would be no waking. David Kenny's journey through the legal system began with a preliminary hearing, where he was formally charged with first-degree murder. This was the first public acknowledgement of the crime he was accused of committing, and the courtroom was a stark contrast to the life he once knew. The evidence presented was damning, painting a picture of deceit and premeditation. The judge, after reviewing the case, found probable cause to proceed, setting bail at an astronomical $1 million, reflecting the severity of the charges and the perceived flight risk. At the bail hearing, David's defense attorney attempted to argue for a reduction, citing David's deep ties to the community, his role as a family man, and his lack of prior criminal history. They painted David as a man caught in a moment of panic rather than a cold-blooded killer, suggesting that a lower bail would ensure his presence at trial while keeping him with his family. However, the prosecution countered with the staged crime scene and David's multiple lies, arguing that his actions post-murder indicated a significant risk of flight or further deception. The judge, unconvinced by the defense's plea, upheld the $1 million bail, effectively ensuring David would remain in custody. The trial itself was a week-long ordeal where the truth of David's actions was laid bare for all to see. The prosecution laid out their case with meticulous detail, evidence of premeditation and lies. They presented the surveillance footage showing David's car at Brad's house before the murder, his phone data placing him at the scene, and the staged robbery as clear indicators of premeditation. They highlighted David's changing stories, his initial lies about his relationship with Brad, and the physical impossibility of his self-defense claim given the nature of Brad's wounds. Forensic discrepancies. The forensic expert testified about the DNA evidence found at the scene, including from a condom that contradicted David's involvement in the act of sex with Brad just before the murder. This, combined with the absence of the murder weapon and the manner of death, further dismantled David's narrative. The defense's argument, however, was one of mitigation rather than denial, manslaughter and self-defense. They argued that if there was a crime, it was manslaughter, not murder, asserting that David had acted in a moment of extreme fear and panic. They painted a scenario where Brad might have been the aggressor, suggesting that David's actions, while tragic, were not premeditated but reactive. Character witnesses, friends and family, including Sherry, testified to David's good character, his role as a loving father and husband, attempting to humanize him and question the intent behind the act rather than the act itself. After both sides presented their cases, the jury was left to deliberate. The weight of evidence, the inconsistencies in David's stories, and the brutality of the crime weighed heavily against him. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty of aggravated murder. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence as the verdict was read, the gravity of the decision settling over everyone present. David, who had once been a figure of community reliability, now faced the consequences of his actions. His life, once intertwined with the promise of family and friendship, was now irrevocably altered, his future determined by the choices made in those dark moments in Brad McGary's basement. In the courtroom, where the air was thick with the culmination of months of legal battles, the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. The atmosphere was somber, every eye fixed on David Kenny, whose life was about to be redefined by the words of the law. The judge, having listened to the evidence, the testimonies, and the arguments from both sides, had 4 sentencing options, all involving life imprisonment with varying possibilities for parole after 20, 25, or 30 years. However, the prosecution had pushed for the harshest sentence, life without the possibility of parole, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the crime, the deception, and the cold-blooded execution of Brad McGary. They argued that David's actions not only ended a life but shattered the trust and safety of the community, leaving a void in the lives of Brad's family that could never be filled. Before the sentence was handed down, David was given the opportunity to speak. Standing before the court, he appeared a shadow of his former self, the weight of his actions and their consequences visibly bearing down on him. He started his statement with an apology, his voice strained with emotion. I want to apologize to Brad's family for all the pain and suffering I've caused. I never intended for any of this to happen. I wish I could take it all back. I know that no amount of apologies can bring Brad back, but I want you to know that I truly regret everything that has occurred. His words, meant to convey remorse, fell into a courtroom where forgiveness was neither expected nor given. The judge, unmoved by David's plea, proceeded with the sentencing. He recounted the numerous lies David had told, the calculated staging of the crime scene, and the betrayal of trust at the heart of this tragedy. The judge articulated that the crime was not merely an act of passion but one of premeditation, where David had lured Brad with the promise of intimacy only to silence him permanently. In his judgment, the judge stated, the decision to impose life without the possibility of parole is made in consideration of the brutal nature of this crime. If you were capable of ending the life of someone who loved you, who was your best friend, it raises serious concerns about what you might do to someone who opposes you. Therefore, I cannot allow the possibility of you returning to public life. David was sentenced to life without parole, with an additional 3 years for the firearm specification, acknowledging his possession of a weapon during the commission of the murder. This sentence meant David would spend the rest of his days behind bars, his freedom stripped away as decisively as he had taken Brad's life. The sentencing marked the end of a legal process, but for those affected by David's actions, it was merely a new beginning to a life shadowed by loss, betrayal, and the haunting memory of what once was. Brad's family left the courtroom with a heavy heart, their grief and anger mingling into a complex tapestry of emotions, while David, now just another inmate, was led away, his life forever changed by the choices made in those fatal moments. Years have passed since the gavel fell on David Kenny's fate, but the echoes of that day in court still resonate in the small town of Belir, Ohio. David remains incarcerated in Ohio, his life now defined by the confines of prison walls rather than the coal mines he once toiled in. His days are spent in a rhythm dictated by the strictures of correctional life, a far cry from the freedom he once knew. In the legal aftermath, David's attorney, still advocating on his behalf, has made several attempts to appeal the sentence, seeking at least the possibility of parole. They argued for a reconsideration based on new evidence or a different interpretation of the existing facts, perhaps hoping to paint the crime in a light of manslaughter rather than murder. However, each appeal has been met with denial, the courts upholding the original sentence of life without parole. Despite this, the legal efforts continue, a testament to the enduring hope for some form of redemption or at least a chance at a life outside of prison walls. The impact of this tragedy extends far beyond the courtroom. For Sherry Kenny, her life has been irrevocably altered by the revelations and the loss. She has had to navigate the complex emotions of betrayal, grief for the friend she lost in Brad, and the daunting task of explaining to her children why their stepfather would no longer be part of their lives. The family dynamic has shifted, and while they attempt to rebuild, the shadow of David's actions lingers over every new memory they make. Brad McGary's family and friends grapple with an absence that will never be filled. Brad, who was known for his vibrant spirit and his courage to live openly in a sometimes hostile environment, left behind a legacy that was cut short. His absence is felt in every gathering, every holiday, every moment where laughter should have been his to share. The tragedy serves as a grim reminder of how secrets can turn to violence, how love can morph into destruction. The community of Belir has also been forced to reflect on the nature of relationships, the masks people wear, and the potential for darkness within even the most familiar faces. David and Brad's story became a cautionary tale, whispered in hushed tones about the dangers of living a double life, the consequences of fear, and the lengths one might go to preserve a facade. The end of this saga is not just about the loss of life but the destruction of trust, the shattering of illusions, and the profound reminder of how quickly life can change from one moment to the next. It's a narrative about the human condition, where love, desire, and fear can conspire to create outcomes no one could have foreseen. David's ongoing incarceration serves as a physical reminder of the crime, but the true aftermath is carried in the hearts of those who knew both men, in the stories they tell, and in the lessons they learn or choose to ignore. The friendship between David and Brad, once a source of joy and companionship, ended in tragedy, leaving behind a tapestry of regret, justice, and the unending quest for some semblance of peace in the wake of such profound loss. In the quiet aftermath of this harrowing tale, we're left to ponder the profound tragedy that secrecy and deception can weave. What began as a story of friendship and clandestine love spiraled into an act of violence that claimed a life and shattered many more. The narrative of David Kenny and Brad McGary is a stark reminder of how the human heart, when cornered by its own fears and desires, can lead to outcomes that are unthinkable until they become reality. The secrecy David maintained, the double life he led, was not just a personal choice but a ticking bomb set in the midst of those he loved. His fear of exposure, of losing everything he had built, culminated in an act that destroyed not only Brad but also the very foundation of his own life. This story serves as a somber testament to the destructive power of hidden truths, where the price of maintaining the facade was ultimately paid in blood. The deception here was not merely about hiding an affair but about the denial of one's true self, the suppression of identity, and the lengths one might go to protect the illusion of normalcy. It's a chilling narrative that invites us to question our own masks, the secrets we keep, and the potential for harm they harbor. As we close this chapter, let it serve as a narrative of caution, a reflection on the complexity of human relationships, and the dire consequences when love, fear, and secrecy collide. This story, like many in the annals of true crime, leaves us with more questions than answers about the nature of love, loyalty, and the human psyche's capacity for darkness. If this tale has gripped you, if it has stirred a curiosity about the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of human interaction, then I invite you to explore further into the world of true crime. For those intrigued by stories from around the globe, consider subscribing to our channel, where we delve into the gripping true crime narratives. Each episode is a journey into the heart of human intrigue, where every case is a puzzle waiting to be solved, every story a lesson in the complexities of truth and deception. Subscribe now to our channel for more explorations into the dark, the mysterious, and the all-too-human stories that define our understanding of crime and justice. Let us continue this journey together, uncovering the layers of secrecy, seeking justice for the forgotten, and understanding the fine line where love can turn to tragedy.